Tomb of Horrors, a classic first edition Dungeons and Dragons dungeon crawl adventure written by Gary Gygax in 1975. This adventure was more recently reprinted for 5th edition in the Tales from the Yawning Portal campaign book, and is meant as the final adventure in that book, although it could easily be a standalone adventure as it was originally intended. The adventure is written for higher level characters, generally speaking, around 10 to 12, although DMs can alter things in the adventure in their own way to adjust it accordingly. The adventure begins in the book when the player characters arrive at the Tomb of Horrors itself, or at least outside of it. As a suggestion, since I have run this adventure, have the player characters hear about the tomb, or at least rumors about it, and give them a good reason for going there. Perhaps they believe that there is indeed a huge amount of treasure that is buried there, lost. Perhaps some other adventurers in the past have tried to find this location and get into it and have failed, or only one adventurer in a prior group 100 years before escaped to tell the tale. Have the tomb be located in a remote area that's difficult to reach. Thus, getting there can be half the battle. And have the legend of Asirakak, the demi-lich in the adventure, and the location itself be something player characters definitely hear about ahead of time. Now, the adventure gives you possible locations in, say, Greyhawk, where you can place it. It does actually have an official location if you really look into it, but here's some additional locations. Here's the location in Forgotten Realms. I placed it in the southern Anarok, but you can place it where you'd like. There could be multiple tombs, by the way. It depends on your campaign, of course. The tomb is more or less a abandoned location, so much so that the entrances are buried with sand. One of the flaws in this adventure is although you get a map of the adventure itself, and this is that map, you don't get an exterior map, although the exterior is mildly described as a hill with a skull like formation on the top of the hill. Player characters are expected to figure out that they have to dig into the hill on one of its sides to be able to get into the tomb. Now, if someone wanted to go ahead and design a map like that, it would prove quite interesting, quite useful for running this adventure. If you're one of those DMs that just wants to run it, where the player characters are just suddenly there, and you want to do it simply, you can do that as well. But if you're running this as part of a campaign, I would suggest getting some additional material to run it. The beginning of the adventure, and I won't go into every detail of every room here, has 3 entrances, 2 of which are fake entrances. I'll note this adventure is very heavy with traps and puzzles. There is some combat in it, of course, and it is meant to be difficult and have some unexpected directions, quite a few, in fact. I'll note if your player characters have already read the adventure or are for some reason reading the adventure while playing, which I had a problem with a player doing that, and they try to cheat by figuring out where all the secret doors are, I would just end the adventure like that and kick those players. This adventure is not about the player characters getting from the beginning to the end. It is about actually challenging them. It's about consequences, and it's a great example of how making the wrong move in a dungeon crawl could be lethal, or you could lose some valuable assets in the very least. Now, you'll note, by the way, as I noted, there is a false entrance here, number 1, and number 2 is a false entrance, and there are fake doors. Each of these entrances is blocked by sand, as is the main entrance in the center. Now, when the player characters get here, they're expected to have a 10-foot pole or something similar to be able to probe the entrances. Player characters likely won't have one of those unless they just happen to have one of those. One suggestion is perhaps they find a wrecked caravan maybe a few days before, and amongst the caravan is a 10-foot pole or maybe a collapsible pole. This might be an object that will come in hand later. I don't recommend giving items like that out very often, but it's almost necessary in this adventure. And again, without that, they may not be able to figure out what to do. It's a bit of a flaw in the beginning, but it is a little bit of a challenge compared to the DM just kind of showing them where the entrance is. In this case, the player characters are going to have to find it, and the correct entrance at that. Now, as you go into the adventure, I'll just show you some of the map. You'll notice all these traps, which this is the DM map. There's also this tunnel here, which is quite narrow as a crawl tunnel. If you're running this on Roll20, you might have some problems unless you find a version of the map that includes a crawl tunnel or a little segment, like a PNG file you can put on top of this that you can add in later. It causes some issues with dynamic lighting as well, which if you use Roll20 a lot, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's also this other tunnel right here on a 2D map surface like Roll20. This would be this little tunnel right here. This would be a problem and be kind of difficult to deal with. And there's some other stuff like this, which again will be kind of a problem. And you'll notice how many times this happens in the adventure where there's just a little dotted line tunnel. If you're running it in person, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to run because of this, unless you find some extensive, high quality maps. And not that this main map is not good, pretty good quality map, but a map that has these little areas included, or there's, like I said, a little PNG file that you can place on top of it to make it a little easier to run. You'll note that there's a lot of secret doors in this adventure, and this adventure doesn't pull any punches. It's not meant to be an adventure where the players just get hints and find ways into everything. They need to be looking and looking in unusual places to find out where to go. And if they make mistakes, there are going to be consequences, which is one of the better parts of this adventure. You'll notice some of these unusual rooms as well, like this room full of columns. If you are running this on Roll20, this room is actually very interesting with dynamic lighting. If the players are going through that, the columns make the lighting scenario very interesting, to say the least. But I'll note as well, there's not that many encounters in the adventure. There are a few, especially near the end, but it's not a typical Gary Gygax bunch of enemies hanging out in a cave adventure. It's very different than, say, the Against the Giant modules. Now, going back to the details of the adventure, you see the two versions of the map, the player's version and DM's version. Again, this is some of these maps can be kind of problematic on Roll20. My other criticism of the map is it is the standard rectangular shaped map, shaped like the page of a book, which is kind of cliche. And perhaps they could have done, Gary Gygax could have gone a different design with this and done something a little more original there. But I understand he was limited by the means at the time, so he had to fit it on a page in a book. So you'll note, by the way, there's some artwork in the there's artwork in the original version as well that's black and white, but the artwork in the 5th edition reprint has some really fantastic images of the entrance here with this chest that seems to be sticking out of the wall, these Egyptian style images on the wall itself, this door here, although I think it's a fake door, and some pretty good description work. Player characters will not know that the hallway is trapped, and I would suggest using those traps accordingly. I'll note that compared to the very first version of it, the original version, this is a lot of these traps have been weakened dramatically. Originally, these traps were very lethal. Now they're dangerous, but they're not horrible. You'll note, by the way, this trap does 5d10 damage to suggest that there is a 50-foot pit there. And, before they were poisoned as well. If you want to really challenge the players, add some poison onto some blades at the bottom of the pits. But the players should realize pretty quickly that this is a dangerous place full of traps. And as the player characters are going in, there is a sliding block trap in the one of the false entrances. It will potentially squish them or block them in that tunnel. Do not be afraid to do some serious damage if the players don't get out of the way of the block trap. In fact, this is something that could easily kill them if they don't take it seriously. And they could easily get trapped behind the block and not have any means of getting out. This might be a serious situation where the player literally is going to run out of air at some point, and they might die because it's a dangerous place. Here's the main entrance with its various traps. There is a message on the ground that is kind of difficult to see. I would not give the player characters this information unless they are really looking for it, or maybe if they have a really high passive perception, they may not find it. The fresco of the wizardly workroom, it's interesting and has a poison needle trap, another deep pit. And we can go over to the map here. We're going to go into room 4 here. Where to go here? So that's actually this location where that door is, and that little chest thing sticking out of the walls. It's a trick, more or less. The nothing is quite real here, and that's interesting because it's not so upfront. You know, the creator of the dungeon, Serac, intentionally wants to hurt people that are trying to get in here, but he does actually want them to try to get into the dungeon for his own twisted purposes. There is this infamous arch of mist with a simple puzzle. If the players do this wrong, and there are multiple mist traps and archways like this, there are some serious consequences. In this case, if you pass through and you don't get the 3 glowing stones in the proper sequence, those passing through it will be sent back to an entrance, and they'll just reappear. There is one trap here where it's very similar, and if they go through the area and they do it wrong, they'll appear at the entrance but with no items including clothing whatsoever. Or there's one that I think changes the character's gender. It just a number of interesting things that can happen here. The point being is it doesn't really give the player characters any real clues. It's really trial and error. They have to figure it out, and if they figure out wrong, well, there's going to be some problems. Now, you also get the infamous The Face of the Great Green Devil. This image, by the way, is this image right here. You might have noticed this, and there was a Hollywood movie which used this. I think it was Ready Player One, and that adventure or that movie and the book does actually involve, at least especially the book, does involve the Tomb of Horrors as part of the novel in the opening part of the novel. The movie just kind of references it more than anything. But this is that infamous devil green or green devil face. This is a very dangerous location. I would not give player characters hints on what this is. Perhaps if they're smart, they'll cast detect magic, and they realize there's a very powerful field here. If they climb into the thing, they will die. No save. Player characters simply die. There are stories of player characters simply one by one crawling into this thing, thinking it will lead them somewhere, and then finding out when the last player jumps in that they've all killed themselves. Congratulations. Let players make mistakes here. Even if there are higher level characters, they should realize that this is not a joke. This is a very dangerous place, and there should be consequences. Now you get further in here, there is some area with some levers. If they pull the levers wrong, they will fall into a horrible deep pit, or they'll be teleported. There's a lot of terrible things that can happen throughout here. There's these 4-armed gargoyles that are in the adventure. You'll note the gargoyles only have 3 attacks. This is kind of odd, in my opinion. I would give them 4 attacks. And if you want to give them a little bit more XP as a result, that's fine. Personally, you could just say they're worth 500 XP and they have another attack. They have 4 arms for a reason. I don't understand why in 5th edition they insist on only giving so many attacks for multiple armed individuals or creatures. Doesn't make any sense. This is one of the few battles that are in this adventure, and it's not even that difficult. So I would up that a little bit, make it make sense. You do get this complex of secret doors here. There are a number of different doors. There are some minor traps around here that aren't really that powerful. They're like spears that come from the ceiling. Do not reveal outright there are secret doors. The player's characters should figure out that this is not just a dead end, that they really have to look for things and make them look for them, make them investigate to try to open the doors. The DM might even want to, describe that each door works differently if you want to do that, and make it interesting and more complex. You encounter the gargoyle, by the way, in room 8. And finally, the player characters are going to get into this very interesting kind of puzzle like room, which is room 10, which is notable. The Great Hall of Spheres. There are lots of different colored spheres in this room. And there are some traps, and there are some various illusions and things like that. The player characters will need to find more or less that there's a tunnel here. It's not that hard to find that there's a tunnel here and there's a tunnel over here. If they just look hard enough, they'll find it. It's really just behind something. There's another one of those archways over here. As the player characters are kind of looking around, they will kind of interact with a lot of this, and they'll realize that it's not really that difficult of a room. It's more like an interesting room more than anything. Um, the player characters will go through here with a little bit of trial and error, but this probably won't be a large part of the adventure. Here we go. There's the three-armed statue, another gargoyle with an extra arm, which is just odd. There's a gem involved. There's You can kind of read through it if you want in detail, but there's an invisible gem of seeing in the hand of its broken off arm. You do get some trapped false doors against number 12 and number 12 again. These are trap doors. Again, traps are a big thing in this adventure. 11 is this little dead end chamber where this gargoyle is with this other gem. And then eventually the player characters, one way or another, might find room 13. There are three chests here, and there's no explanation of what they're for. There's also the secret door. This is where this tunnel here connects to the hallway of orbs here and via the secret door, and also over to the lever room, which the player characters might end up in through various mistakes or means. They all connect here, and this is kind of the way everything goes back together. The Chamber of Three Chests, again, there's poisonous snakes in one. It's not a very difficult fight. There's a silver chest with a lot of good equipment in it. And then there's another one with a giant skeleton, which somehow fits in that box. But this is kind of one of those issues where being a giant skeleton, it's going to be in a very small room, and it doesn't theoretically fit in the box very well. The DM would have to describe how it pops out of this box or this chest because it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of a minor flaw with this adventure. You could switch out the giant skeleton with something else, perhaps, that makes a little more sense, like maybe the chest is full of some sort of powerful ooze that fits in the box and has a reaction set for when the chest opens. Eventually, though, the player characters will come to this chapel here, which is, guess what, trapped. And also, there appears to be another archway for a reason. Has some great descriptions here. There's a lot of coinage and traps. Most of the coinage is silver and electrum pieces, a little bit of gold that are in odd numbers hidden in the pews. I find this to be kind of odd that there'd be exactly this amount of pieces here. It seems like it would be incredibly intentional of a Cyriac to do that, but these back of the pews must be stuffed with coinage to have this much coinage in there. It's kind of odd. There are some interesting traps, and it's not that predictable unless the players are trying to read the adventure, which again, if they start doing that, kick them out of the game. Only way I can say it. The archway is difficult. These archways don't follow any pattern, and it's a great idea for Gary Gygax to do that. There's a skeleton, of course, misleading the party, suggesting going through that. It's one of those where there's different consequences as to what the players do, how many times they go through it. Player characters may lose items, they may have their gender reversed or switched. There's a lot of interesting things that can happen here. So there's also this weird wall slot. This is actually the way to get into the next room where they have to put a coin in the slot. It's kind of odd, but it's different. We go over to the stone gate, and that's more or less part of the wall slot here. And there are a number of passages here that just kind of wind around, and you'll see what I mean here. Doors, traps, and finally the player characters find this long hallway that leads to room 16 or the locked oaken door. And obviously they have to get through it. There's some noise. This is probably that door right there, which nice image. I would definitely share that image. Going beyond that hall, though, there is this pit of lava, and this area slants downward. Again, it's a trap. It's a false destination, and this place is full of this kind of stuff. We got number 17, the magical secret door, which the way to get through here, obviously, and the DM knows this, is there's a hidden tunnel at the bottom of this pit here, which is clever. It means that this whole area over here is actually below over this area down here is technically below this area over here. There's a elevation difference. If they get in here, they may eventually get around the corner here. They'll find this door and 18A, which is more or less the fake crypt. You know, this is a brilliant idea, by the way. A lot of player characters who aren't really thinking about where they're going will just think, "Oh, we found it. We found the end." But of course, there's a secret door on the stairs here where you probably wouldn't expect it on the wall, which the player characters may easily miss. Of course, the false trap is, or the false crypt has a greater zombie as the boss fight. To any experienced player characters, this should seem way too easy. There is some treasure here. The crown is worth a fortune, and there are some other potions here. This is not bad treasure, but again, the boss fight is just way too easy. And any players with any salt that have been playing a while are going to realize something's off here. This happened with my group. They thought this doesn't make any sense. There's some good treasure. Something's off. Then they began searching the hallway, and then they found the secret door. Now, some groups might just assume that that's it. That's the adventure. More experienced players might think, well, isn't this a big map? Shouldn't there be more that is kind of metagaming? But it also is from experience that there might be more. So if they find the secret door, if they find it, they might get further to room 19. And again, this is the mummy preparation room and all that. There are some different vats here. A couple of other things. There's an ochre jelly, nothing really dangerous. You get another one of these. Number 20 is this huge pit full of spikes. I'll find it here. It's just an open pit. Player characters can head down there. There's a dead end at the end. There's a secret door not at the end, which one way or another leads further into the adventure to room 21. Let's go to room 21 here. The agitated chamber. This room, well, full of funeral offerings. It's kind of odd. The interesting thing about it is there are a bunch of different uh, types of molds in it, essentially. A lot of the tapestries in particular are actually just made of mold. And how the players interact in this room is going to lead to how much mold they have to deal with. There's also, again, a secret door, which then leads further down, further into the adventure. It'd be interesting if someone actually did a isometric perspective of the shape of this dungeon as well, considering there's so many stairways that go further down, there's so many pits and how they look, and the fact that this area over here is at the bottom of a pit. Again, when they come to this junction, there's a pit, there's another pit before this door, there's a false door to the south, of course, why not? There is a secret door to the north, and then we get into this interesting thing. This is a false door, and so is this one on the north wall, but not on the south wall. The player characters should have no idea that there's actually a secret door there, but there is a door on the east wall, and eventually it leads to room 22, which is just kind of an odd room, a room with a bunch of myths, and it's actually one of the only role-playing areas here where the players will come across a siren who has some random treasure of some sort, which she might be a source of information about a Sirak. She's not meant as a major threat. It just kind of throws the player characters off, which is interesting. We go in further, and again, the player characters will have to figure out by now there's a secret door here. They probably will find it. The trick, of course, is this next secret door is directly past it on the floor. If the player characters go further up here, this is one of those death trap areas. Room 23, there is effectively a stone juggernaut, the steamroller device that comes out. There is a poison gas trap that can knock the players out. And effectively, what happens is they are going to get steamrolled while knocked out. It is tricky to make sense. You assume these doors open on their own, like maybe they pull into the wall. The steamroller is quite big. If this is happening, you could just say the player characters are dead if they get steamrolled. But a better idea would be if they're being steamrolled, maybe they wake up right as it's happening and have the player characters, take some damage and try to escape, but losing, maybe their legs get crushed or they lose an arm, and they can give them a chance to get out of it. There's also some builds where the steamroller is something they can fight, but it's a very powerful construct. I would recommend doing it that way. Otherwise, this is one of those traps that's just utterly brutal. Give them some chance there if they get knocked out. Not, don't give them a lot, but there should be some chance of actually getting out of it. Although, again, it's a death trap basically. We go to room 14, or sorry, 24. To get there, there is this hidden passage. It's below the floor, and this is one of those issues where you kind of need a little PNG file to add on top of the map if you're rolling out on Roll20. There's stairs, there's this long tunnel, it reconnects over here. I don't really understand why they didn't just draw this on the map. Eventually, it comes to an adamantite door where there's these slots on the door. It's anti-magic. Um, there is a way of getting through it if they stick swords in it, but it's just kind of a dumb puzzle that's easily solvable after some trial and error. And then we get to the pillar room, which is, very interesting with its little side chambers and all that. If you're running this, like I said, on Roll20, it's very interesting with dynamic lighting, the way it kind of sets up. There is this throne with the scepter and the scepter and the crown, which is another death trap, and the player characters may not figure out how to do it, or they might get lucky. One of my player characters had his character disintegrated here. He'd been playing the character for almost 20 years, and he made the serious mistake of just willingly putting the crown on his head and, using the scepter incorrectly, and he got disintegrated. He also was reading the book or had a copy of the map during the adventure. I realized it, so I did not feel bad when he got disintegrated. Boo hoo. As you go further, the player characters may get into some of these rooms and they might get through here. There's a cursed gem here. There's some other minor stuff in the room, traps and all that, in the pillar room and all that. There's these small rooms to the north, some other treasure, things like that, other such things. There's a secret door that's right here on the south side of the throne in kind of an odd place, which leads to room 28 and 29, essentially where the stairs are here. I'll just kind of move over this way. As you go over here, the wondrous foray with a nice description, which has this antipathy sympathy spell, trying to push the characters away if they don't do it right. There's the keyhole. There's a blood trap where it just like pours blood out, and that a bunch of different spells that can go off or are required here. It's another puzzle, effectively, and you can read the details if you'd want. But then again, this adventure is full of traps and puzzles that are unexpected. And then, like the false boss fight, you get a false treasury room. And what's interesting here is one, there's a secret door and all that. That's important. There's lots of secret doors. There's statues that have magical auras. They don't do anything. It's kind of a red herring. Um, there is the interesting idea is it looks like in this chamber an individual who has broken a staff of the magi here, and this is again part of the trick of this room. It's meant to trick the player characters and to say that anything further will lead to their utter destruction. And this is again meant to distract the player characters if they get here and they kind of have to deal with this. Here's the broken staff of the magi. When my player characters got here, they fell for this. They thought we can't go any further. If someone had to break a staff of the magi, it's a death trap beyond this. There's no way to win. This is the intention of the creator, of course, to get them to do that, and it might happen in your game. Otherwise, they might just be really inquisitive and they might go a little bit further. If they do, again, through another secret door, another adamantine door, I believe, and all that. Look over here, number 32. The south door portal can't be detected by magical means. It's not really that hard to notice this door. I should note it's a small metal opening with a metal-lined obvious keyhole. So it's not an adamantine door. There are a number of keys in the adventure, by the way, false keys and first keys, second keys that the player characters may find. If they don't find the keys, it's going to be pretty dangerous. There is a adamantite slab here that is going to be difficult to get through. One warning here: there are some spells in 5th edition that player characters' cantrips, particularly the player characters could try to use to just cut through the side of the wall and just nerf this trap or nerf this and get around it by like molding earth. I would put some rules into the game about that, or make something in here so the player characters can't just do things like that. That's something power gamers often try to use, basically to to avoid having consequences in D&D. Put it in maybe that there's a wall of force around it, that they can't do that. That will just prevent them from being able to just get to the treasure easily, effectively. Now, I'll note, by the way, there's this sort of back area here where there's these, doors that lead nowhere, and two fake doors which lead really nowhere. Finally, though, you get to the crypt of Asirak the Demi-Lich. Here he is, in as his skull. He does show up in full form, by the way, in Tomb of Annihilation, but that's a whole nother adventure. There, the player characters have found numerous keys, and if they use the keys here, different things are going to happen. There is a large amount of treasure here that it's an absolute fortune that the player characters will find. Literally, four magic weapons, a defender sword, a sword of vengeance, a berserker axe, some other items. Some of these are very valuable. Some of them are less so. Some random spell scrolls. It's quite the treasure hoard. No matter what happens, the boss fight here is a Demi-Lich. Do not pull any punches. This is a huge amount of treasure, and if there's a lot of reward, there should be a lot of risk. And the player characters should realize as they're fighting this just how dangerous this situation is. And Demi-Liches are very, very dangerous. If they beat the Demi-Lich and destroy it, then I feel like they should have this treasure. Although you'll notice 3 gems. One of them was worth 100,000 gold. It's a giant black opal. This is so much treasure, it will likely unbalance your campaign. Be aware of this before starting this adventure, that if they do get through here, this could happen. Or perhaps there's a consequence if they take the black opal. Maybe it leads somewhere else, or yeah, it's worth a fortune, but it comes with a terrible curse if they touch it or whatever, something like that. Now, overall, it's a really unique adventure compared to, say, some of the other adventures that Gary Gygax wrote. I've run a number of his adventures. Many of his adventures are just different rooms full of different enemies, such as the Lost Caverns of Tjananth, or however you pronounce it, which are typical of a lot of his adventures. And like many of his adventures, like, say, what is that one called? Not Tomb of Horrors. This is Tomb of Horrors. Not the Village of Homelit is kind of has a similar vibe to it, as in it's kind of a random dungeon crawl going to different locations and a lot of different possibilities. It kind of reminds me of that a little bit, and that's also one of Gary Gygax's better adventures. But I actually think this is his best adventure, and I played quite a few of them. Now, as I said, don't pull punches with this adventure. There's a lot of reward, and again, a lot of risk involved. And don't just give away the endings. Don't give away secret doors. If you have a problem with a player, like I actually did with mine, who quite clearly seemed to be reading the adventure, or at least looking at the map that they found online and trying to find all the secret doors, deal with that the old fashioned way. Put them against something that's going to take out their character or seriously damage their character. Perhaps throw something extra in if they're going to pull stuff like that, or move the secret doors. I mean, this is Tomb of Horrors. Players should not have a way through here. But this is also a really good example of how to build a dungeon crawl correctly and make it a challenge. If you want to design your own, it'll give you some great ideas for that. Overall, like I said, it does need an exterior map. It's a great example of consequences. It's odd that it's a typical rectangular map, which is, something that's a little cliche in D&D. And the adventure needs a little bit of a better intro, but overall, it's so different and it's challenging. And in many ways, a lot of modern adventures don't really challenge player characters. They kind of hold player characters' hands, almost like they're all written for brand new players, where this is an adventure written for experienced players. And even then, there are so many traps here, there's so many chances the players could screw up, that there are serious consequences that can happen. This adventure, by the way, was designed for player characters to come in with sort of pre-built high-level characters and then go through the traps and explore everything. I ran it with experienced, with established characters, where there was some real possibility that their long-standing characters could be seriously altered or destroyed, and again, that did happen. I would recommend running it like that. That if they go into Tomb of Horrors, they will have to deal with the Tomb of Horrors, and the consequence of having a major character of theirs they've been playing for a long time disintegrated for some massive treasure should definitely be there effectively. Now, guys, I would recommend this. I would state this adventure is a 4-star out of 5 adventure. It has a lot of cool stuff in it. And again, it's a challenge. I can't say this enough, but I like the fact that it doesn't hold the player characters' hands as they're going through the adventure. The player characters will really have to take initiative in many aspects of this adventure to get through it, or at least to find all the secret doors, unless they're unfortunately looking up the adventure, which is an issue with modern adventures these days with the internet. But it's again one of Gary Gygax's best adventures as a result, and I'd highly recommend you at least run it once and put player characters through it. You could just run it with pre-built characters of like 10th level and seeing what the player characters do. It's always interesting what one group does versus what another group does. Now, guys, if you like these reviews and want to see more of them, please like, please subscribe, or hit the bell icon, and stay tuned for additional reviews and other material.